What's up, guys? My name is Detective Guy, and I can sniff any lie. Doesn't matter if you're a veteran spy, to get away from me, you need a rock solid alibi. So, some of you guys may know this about me, but some of you may not. Um, so, I grew up a Christian. I grew up going to church and thought that that was like the bee's knees, which is an old saying. I thought Jesus was awesome. I thought that I was always going to like love God and follow him. And then some stuff happened. I graduated high school and I went to college. I went to Vanderbilt to play baseball. And after my freshman year, I had like this miserable experience. And I was like, I want to play sports, but I don't want to play baseball anymore. And I'd grown up in Lake Tahoe skiing. So I left Vanderbilt and moved out to Lake Tahoe to start trying to ski and compete in skiing. And my goal was to make the US ski team and go to the Olympics. And I got out there, and as most of you guys probably know, I ended up skiing for the next like 12 or 13 years and was on the US ski team for 10 of those years. But I did not ever make an Olympics. I was like kind of in contention 2010, and then was really, really close in 2014, but did not make either. And when I got out to Lake Tahoe, I had always had best friends that were Christians and went to church every Sunday. And when I got to Tahoe, all of a sudden I was competing in ski events on Sundays, and I didn't have any friends that were Christians. And so I just like wasn't hearing about God or Jesus. And I was like reading my Bible some, but it was just not as much a part of my life as it was before that. And the longer that I lived that way, the more that I stopped thinking that God could meet all my needs and started thinking that maybe other things could meet all my needs. And so I just started trying to do the things that made me the happiest and do the things that I wanted the most. And so I discovered drinking, I discovered smoking weed, discovered just drugs in general, and partying. So I thought that partying could give me what I needed. And I started making some money and being really successful. And I thought that making money and being successful and having people know who I was and traveling the world and seeing new places and doing what I love, which was skiing and having a bunch of fun, and then hanging out with girls and in relationships. And so I thought that money and success and drugs and partying and relationships would give me everything that I needed. I thought that that was like all I wanted. I thought that's what life was all about. And I went down that road for about 7 to 10 years. And the further along I got, the more of all of those things I experienced. Like I experienced those things at a higher level. I got more and more famous. I made more and more money, which meant I partied more and more and had more and more relationships and did more and more drugs. And but what I realized over time was the more that I did those things, I never felt satisfied. I just like the more money I made, I wanted more money. The more famous I was, I wanted to be more famous. The more relationships I had, I wanted more relationships. The more partying I did, I just wanted to party more. And so it didn't matter like how much of any of that I was never satisfied. I just always wanted more. And I remember at the end of one of the ski seasons, I just like had this moment where I thought, gosh, I feel insatiable, which insatiable means you can never get enough. Like I don't know how I mean, I was making plenty of money, I was plenty famous, I was partying a ton, like I was doing as much of all those things as I wanted. And I was like, I don't know how I could do any more of this. And I still want more. I still like am not satisfied. I'm not happy. And I remember thinking, this can't be what life is about. It can't be about having fun, doing what I want, relationships, friends, freedom. Like I have all of those things at the highest level. Like I have more of that than probably anybody you've ever known. And it's not enough. I'm not happy or satisfied or peaceful. Um, this can't be all that life is about. And so I started thinking, like, what could life really be about? And I started thinking about to when I was in high school and when I was trying to live with God and thinking, I remember in those days, I felt a lot of peace. I felt a lot of joy. I felt a lot of freedom. And I thought maybe God is real and maybe God did create me. And maybe living with God is actually going to be everything that I need. Maybe God really can give me everything I need. And so I started pursuing God. I started asking people about God. I started reading my Bible. I started going to church to learn. Like like at this point, I had nothing to lose. Like, let's see if God is the answer, and if He's not, then I'll move on to the next thing. But I was like determined to find the answer to kind of what the point of life is. Um, and I got to this point. And where I started to learn what I believe to be true. And I wanted to share this story with you guys today. And this story is out of um, Luke, which is a book in the Bible. No, excuse me. It's out of Mark, which is another book of the Bible, chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. So I don't know how many of you guys, the ways that you guys learn, but I'm auditory and visual. Uh, so for those of you that are auditory, just listen. For those of you that are visual, I put the verses in the chat so you can read along. You can also look them up in your Bible if you want. But this is the story. So let me give you the background first on this story. So Jesus had been traveling. So we're back 2,000 years ago. Jesus had lived on the earth for a little over 30 years at this point, and he had started traveling around and performing all these miracles, and people were following him from all over the place. They were coming to hang out with him, listen to him speak, watch him perform miracles. Like, he was a rock star before there were rock stars. Like, if he had a Twitter account, he would have tweeted like, "Hey, I'm in Galilee," and everyone would have gone to Galilee to see Jesus. He was just like the most famous person in the world. And people were going because they were hearing about him and they wanted to see, well, maybe he can heal me or do something for me, or maybe I'm going to see him do something ridiculous. And it's like the highest form of entertainment. And so this is where we drop into the story. And so Jesus was traveling. He actually at this point was going. There was this really rich person who had a kid who was dying, and Jesus was going to see this dying kid, and everyone thought that he was going to heal this kid. And so this story is along the way. And it says, along the way, there was a woman there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet insisted on getting better. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So just imagine this. This woman has been bleeding for 12 years, and we don't know anything more than that, but she, just imagine how miserable that'd be to be bleeding for 12 straight years. It said she had suffered a great deal under a bunch of doctors and had spent all the money she had, but it only gotten worse. So imagine at this point, she's broke, she's penniless, probably she's hopeless. She's done everything she can to try and fix herself, and none of it has helped. On top of that, back in this culture, if you bled, you were considered unclean. And so nobody would want to touch you, because if someone touched you while you were bleeding, then they were considered unclean, and they had to like leave town and go outside and do the ceremonial washing for like 24 hours before they could come back. So it was like a hassle. You didn't want to touch anything that was bleeding. So imagine this woman is broke, she's hopeless, she's bleeding, and she probably has not had a hug or held someone's hand or had a friendly conversation with a person in 12 years. She is an outcast in every way, shape, and form. So just imagine this woman is like, you think like she is sad beyond sad. And it says, then it goes on to say, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. And so, you know, that when this woman heard about Jesus, it was probably the first time she'd felt hope in a long time. She's like, I've heard about Jesus. He's healing all these people. Maybe he can heal me. So I can imagine she's excited. And then it says, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. So I just want to help you guys understand how brave this woman is. because so we know Jesus has crowds of people around him everywhere he goes because he's super famous. And we know that, so it's like super tight. It's like, imagine a crowd at a concert, like you can't walk through it without touching people. Well, this woman worked through the crowd so that she could touch Jesus and hopefully be healed. But think about how scary that would be for this woman, because like we talked about, if you touch anyone that's bleeding, you're unclean. Well, imagine every person that she touched on the way to touching Jesus would have been ceremonially unclean. So if anyone had known it was her and that she was bleeding, they would have been pissed at her for like basically touching them. And so imagine how scary it was for her to push through this crowd. Imagine how much faith and hope she must have had in Jesus. And said, so she went up and touched his clothes because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. There's her hope. And the moment that she touched him, immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. Okay, let's just pause here for a moment. Like, how crazy is this that she touched Jesus's clothes and instantly stopped bleeding? Like, that is nuts. That is crazy. That's truly crazy. We have never, ever seen anything like that before. And then it goes on to say, at once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? And his disciples, his best friends that are with him, are basically like, Jesus, you're crazy. What? They say, you see the people crowding against you. His disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? Basically, they're saying, everybody's touching you. What do you mean, who touched me? It says, but Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And imagine how scared this woman was. She touches Jesus, instantly stops bleeding, and then Jesus turns around and is like, who's touched me? And she'd be like, oh, I don't know. It was... Like, what would you do? Would you raise your hand and be like, it was me? Or would you like try and hide and scurry away? Like, I don't know. That'd be a crazy situation. And it says, then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, he told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And so this is just a powerful moment. In other books of the Bible where it tells the same story, it says that Jesus sat and he listened to her whole story. And so it's crazy. Jesus is on his way to like heal the son of a really important person. This woman touches him and he takes the time to stop and listen to her story, to listen. And it says to listen to her whole story, which if we told someone our whole story, it'd probably take a while. So he may have been sitting there listening to this woman for a while. And then he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. So we know this woman had a bunch of needs. She needed to stop bleeding. She needed to be reincorporated into community because we know that she had basically been outcast that whole time and no one had touched her. And she needed to be loved. And ultimately, she needed a relationship with God. And and she needed to be seen and heard and cared about, right? Like no one had cared about her for 12 years, probably. And so in this moment, in this one interaction, Jesus meets every single one of her needs. It's amazing. First, he calls her daughter, which is like, Jesus is the man. Everyone wants to be with Jesus. And the moment Jesus calls this woman daughter, he says, you are mine. You're my daughter. I love you. I see you. I care about you. And so in that moment, we know that everybody was like, oh, well, if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for us. So Jesus first puts her back into a good place in society. She is now accepted again. He also heals her, which we know is all of a sudden she's not bleeding and she's probably can save some money and she can go back to work. So he meets her physical needs. He meets her emotional needs. He listens to her whole story. So it's for her the opportunity to feel seen and cared about and loved. Did you guys know that the brain actually, if we tell someone something hard and they listen to us and they show us empathy, it actually changes the wiring in our brain and heals our brain. So we know that physically we experience healing when people listen and care. And so Jesus does that for her. And then he says, go in peace and be freed from your suffering. So Jesus gives her peace so she doesn't have to feel anxious or afraid anymore and be free from your suffering. He takes away her suffering. So Jesus literally meets every single one of her needs. And I had the same experience where as I learned to walk with God, all of a sudden I realized that being really rich, famous, having a bunch of relationships, partying a ton, drugs, none of that was going to meet all of my needs. Now, Jesus was, because ultimately my greatest need is, as a broken person who has made mistakes, I am separated from the perfect God that created me and loved me more than anything. And so Jesus, because he loves us so much, Jesus, as God, came down to earth and lived a perfect life to pay the penalty for all of our mistakes, because we know that when we make mistakes, there has to be a penalty. When you get in trouble, there's always a consequence. Well, all of our mistakes have a consequence, and that consequence is separating us from God. But Jesus came down and lived a perfect life and died on the cross and came back to life to be the perfect consequence for all of us, to pay the price for all of us. And all we have to do is believe in him and follow him, and we get to be back in perfect relationship with God. We get everything we need. We get to be with God now and forever. When we die, we don't have to fear death because we can get to go be with God forever. And so we don't have to waste our time trying to be in a bunch of relationships, to make a bunch of money, to like have as much fun, like to focus on these earthly things. Now, those things are not bad. God, as a gift, he gave us joy and fun and freedom, and all the good things that are here are gifts from God, and he wants us to experience those. But all of those things aren't meant to meet our needs. They're meant to point us to God. They're ways for us to see, oh, this is a good thing. I see that God created this good thing because he loves me. And it's meant to help us see that. And so I just want to encourage all of you guys that the things that I've shared to be true for me, the things that were true for this woman, are true for you guys also. Jesus is the answer to all of your needs. And while we all have to walk our own path and try and meet our needs in all these different places, I promise you the only place you're going to actually find your needs met is in a relationship with Jesus. And so I want to encourage you to start to pursue that now, because if you pursue it now, you will find that it's true sooner, and you don't have to waste a long time pursuing other things. Like me, I wasted all of my 20s pursuing all these things that meant nothing. And it was good in the sense that I now know what those are, and I know they aren't the answer, and I know that God is the answer. But if you start pursuing God now, then you don't have to waste time pursuing those other things. You can pursue God and then do those other things too, because they're fun and they're good and they're gifts from him, but knowing that those aren't going to be your ultimate answer. God is the ultimate answer.